Hey everyone, welcome to the YMS Podcast. We are our hosts. I am Colin Mansfield, and I'm joined, as always, by Seve Carnera. I want to say hi, Seve.
Hey everybody, great to see you all.
We love having the opportunity to come on here and share some yard management insights. This is a bit of a niche podcast, and we like it that way. There's not very many people talking about the role yard management plays in the logistics industry, and kind of how we've described it the last few episodes that we've done. You know, the yard's been treated as a bit of a black hole traditionally in the supply chain, especially amongst facilities, where, you know, once a trailer arrives at a facility, something happens and it eventually makes it to the docks, and then once it's off the docks, something else happens. Eventually, it makes it out of the facility. And what we love diving deeply into on this show is what that something else happens is, which is yard management. Seve has over 10 years of experience specifically in yard management. I have 4.5 years working with yard management solutions. So today we are focused on sustainability in yard management, which seems like one of those topics that, I don't know, a lot of folks throw around sustainability. A lot of folks, you know, talk about sustainability. What does that actually mean? And what does it mean as it applies to our industry? Seve, I know you've been around a while and you've seen kind of the industry change and shift throughout the years. When you think of sustainability, and that could be, you know, the reducing carbon footprint, that could be reducing CO2 emissions. We'll talk more about that. How have you seen sort of the industry's, I guess, you know, whether it's marketing or actually practical use of sustainability, how has that changed over the years?
Yeah, Colin, great question. And there's been more focus on that over the past few years, especially for example, in some states like California that have passed laws to capture what types of vehicles are coming in and out of the facility. Are they electric? If they are, what size, etc. So yeah, over the past few years, there's been a big push towards that, especially with EV vehicles coming into play now, especially EV yard trucks, etc. But without a doubt, you've really nailed it on the head. This is something that we're seeing a big influx, and something that we have customers coming to us, bringing us data about CO2 emissions, for example, at their facilities and how we've helped improve that. Again, some of these things were a byproduct of our solution being input into their distribution centers, for example. But it has become a topic that I have been approached about more often than not now, especially here lately.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Last year, we were out at the LogiMat trade show out in Stuttgart, Germany, and I was blown away, frankly, at how many companies were focusing on sustainability as not just a piece of their marketing, but almost like the driving piece of their marketing and of what their company's trying to accomplish. We think about this idea of greenwashing and how sometimes that's not the primary goal, but companies make it seem like it's the primary goal. Do you think that that's a concern when we talk about sustainability, specifically in logistics? Is that something to be wary of when a company say, "Oh, we're going to help your, whatever it is when it comes to CO2 emissions," or like you said, we're going to make your, we're going to reduce your carbon footprint? Have you seen that sort of become a trend?
It's become a trend for sure. But like anything else, as long as you do your homework and you ask for numbers behind that data, examples of that data, if you have customers that can speak to it as well too, that helps tremendously. So to your point, I think some of it is fluff, but at the end of the day, I believe that a lot of industries, a lot of organizations are truly wanting to be more sustainable from a standpoint of a total yard solution, and then also helping out from the total sustainability mantra that they may have within the organization. It's only a small piece of that, obviously, but it does contribute to the greater whole.
Yeah, I agree. So it's interesting when a lot of times when I'm talking to companies about the benefits that they're going to get out of a yard management system and what they're hoping to accomplish, what are their goals, and how can our company help with that? For example, I've sort of started using this as an analogy, call it the iceberg effect, right? Where a lot of companies will come to us or any vendor really, knowing that they have some challenges, right? And that could be they're losing trailers, or they're a reefer operation and they lost a load and they're experiencing spoilage. I've seen more in the news recently about, containers getting stolen, theft off of a yard, for example. And these are very real, kind of tangible issues that companies are facing. It could even be just, hey, we know we're paying too much in driver detention or demurrage. And so they're feeling that pressure and they're feeling that negative kind of side effects of not having a dedicated solution to track their yard. And the reality is that what's interesting is that after we've talked to our customers, right, they come on to solve those challenges. What we found is that those issues that they're describing that are very tangible, very real, and incredibly potent only represent about 20% of what they actually get out of the system, right? The other 80% is that bottom part of the iceberg underneath the water. And sustainability was, to your point, you mentioned this just a couple minutes ago. Sustainability was one of those where, we haven't until recently really started looking at sustainability in yard management with any sort of data to back that up. And we had a customer, Michelin Tire, who came to us and they said, hey, by the way, I don't know if you guys know this, but you have actually helped decrease our carbon footprint, our CO2 emissions, and not by an insignificant amount. We'll get into it, talk more about the case study here in a minute. But I'm interested if that is going to become more something companies realize. What's your take on like corporate sustainability initiatives? I mean, you mentioned the laws here in California. That's where I live. Do you think that there's pressure, outside pressure, that companies are responding to in regards to sustainability, Seve?
Yeah, sure, for sure. And I'm sure that a lot of these organizations are getting some sort of government subsidies for keeping their sustainability programs in place and keeping those sustainability numbers as low as possible. I mean, that's obviously why California is doing it, which I think is great. But again, to your point, they need some way to be able to measure those things and be able to concentrate on what's actually occurring out in a yard, for example. So I think from a corporate standpoint, it's great in that these organizations are doing that. It's fantastic that we can contribute to that, to your point, based on the iceberg effect, things that we really never really thought about, but we've been able to improve upon based on just the use of the system. Simple things like maybe assigning moves to drivers where they're in that area, and instead of having them go from the west side of the building over to the east side of the building, they've got another move there on the west side. Well, you know what? Let's give them that move instead. So pushing these moves to the drivers instead of them just picking and choosing off a list, for example. I think that little things like that contribute to the greater whole.
No, without a doubt. And to what you just said is a great example of how functionality can have very positive, if unintended at first, consequences to operation. I mean, at the end of the day, operational workflow, building a more efficient operational workflow means less fingers in the puzzle of the yard, right? Less people having to sort of manually navigate the yard, less people walking around, and ultimately less vehicles having to drive around.
Yep.
So when you think about operational efficiency, that actually ends up, if it's done well, being closely tied to this idea of sustainability and sort of, going green, so to speak, even if that's not the primary goal, at least from the outset. I want to talk about this case study briefly because I found it really interesting what Michelin came and told us. And their example was exactly what you laid out, which is, hey, look, before YMS, we had a bunch of yard drivers, those hostlers, jockeys, shunters, yard dogs, whatever you want to call them, out in the yard making it happen. And they were primarily using radios, right? Some of them using move sheets, probably different operations do it different ways, but all of it is manual if you don't have a system that's tracking that. And what they saw was even just giving drivers the ability to see what moves were in the system at that time and be able to see where the closest move to them were, even just that step. And we'll talk about automation as well, but even just that step drastically improved how quickly moves are happening, the ability to complete more moves per hour, and ultimately being able to conduct more efficient moves because, again, nobody wants to be going from the west side of the building to the east side of the building, like you said. Let's talk about that. How do you take that a step further, though, right? Rather than just giving somebody the visibility, Seve, could you talk a little bit about the automation piece of it and how do we actually, in our system and in the industry as a whole, where do those automations really have an impact in regards to sustainability in the yard?
Yeah, so great point, Colin. And let's not forget about fuel savings as well too, because that's another huge factor of these types of things as well too. Instead of a yard truck having to be filled up with fuel every couple of hours, let's say, for example, it only needs to be filled up every 3 hours, for example. So it's some of those things that, again, because you're making the system smart enough to identify what that next move should be for that driver. Again, it cuts down on their travel time, it cuts down on fuel, it cuts down on the fuel emissions, etc. So it's those types of things that, again, are byproducts of using a solution like ours, because, again, we didn't necessarily build the solution to be a green solution, but because of the way we manage the solution in order to make operations more efficient, again, it's been a byproduct of that. And again, that's a great example of that is, making sure that these drivers are not necessarily just driving around the yard for the sake of driving around. Number one. Number two, they're also not driving around the yard to look for a particular unit as well too. I typically use the analogy in my demos about doing the Easter egg hunt out in the yard for a trailer. And I think you've heard me say this too. Those days of
Yep.
doing an Easter egg hunt through the entire yard looking for your unit are eliminated because solutions like ours will actually tell those drivers where that actual unit is at. And then on top of that, we actually assign that move to that closest driver. So things like that really make a huge impact at the end of the day. No pun intended. And you can at that point have a lot of savings, not just in fuel cost, etc., but also in that green initiative that makes you understand that, hey, these little things that we've added to our solution, included into our process, are going to make us more green and more sustainable as we move forward, which companies love, especially when they can share those hard numbers with other organizations, with other government agencies, etc. And then those types of things just help those organizations become more powerful at the end of the day.
Yeah, exactly. The feedback that we got from Michelin was that at the facilities that implemented YMS, they estimate, and this is on the conservative side, a 50% reduction in CO2 emissions for those yard drivers. 50%,
Yeah.
50. And that was, again, due to those decreased movements required to go find trailers. The Easter egg hunt, which, by the way, I've started saying, I picked it up from you, and now I've started saying it because it's a great analogy. Instead of having to drive around the yard and find where things are, oh yeah, it's somewhere over on that side of the facility, having that laser focused specificity on where an asset is just, not only doesn't make their job way easier, but it again decreases that time to find it. So 50% is what Michelin provided to us. But what they actually said was, look, the perceived improvement is well above 50%. In other words, 50% is the number, but actually when it comes time to actually talk to users about what impact this has had on their operation, it's resounding. It seems like it's way above 50% because people's jobs are just that much easier and they're able to accomplish their tasks that much more efficiently. You talked about corporate sustainability goals, and this was the interesting thing in our case study with them. They admitted, they said, look, this was only, at a few of our facilities did YMS first get implemented at, but we're looking at bringing the solution across all of North America. And if that were to be the case, then this would have a major impact on our sustainability goals as a company. So when you've got a company at that scale saying that, hey, this one software solution, implementing it across our broader supply chain is going to have a huge impact. And not only that, but it's going to positively impact the bottom line. Like you were mentioning, fuel costs, you can directly correlate those to CO2 emissions and directly correlate those to actual money saved. So you got a both and scenario there. Let's talk about technology. So when I think of assigning drivers, yard drivers, efficient moves, my brain immediately goes to, how do you know where those drivers are, right? And there's lots of things we can talk about in regards to technology. Let's start there. Seve, what have you seen work really well when it comes to tracking drivers around a facility and being able to assign moves to them in a cohesive, structured way?
Yeah, great question, Colin, and a real good point as well too. So, what I've seen in the past, and it's very common in the industry, the yard drivers have a tablet inside of their yard truck. And on that tablet, those devices have a GPS unit on them as well too. So as a result of that, and again, this is a question that we get often as well too from customers, how can you do that? Well, it's real simple. We tap into that GPS device of that tablet and we know where they are in the yard at that given point in time. That helps tremendously from a standpoint of saying, hey, they're over on the east side of the building again, using that analogy, and let's assign the next move that's closest to them as well. And we're just talking about operations yards that are within one campus. When you stretch that out to multi-campus facilities where you have also operations that use shuttle trucks that move traders from one facility to the other, that also helps tremendously as well too, because when you get to the other facility, the last thing you want that driver to do is turn around, bobtail, come back to the original facility, make some more moves over there, and then realize there was a trailer at the other facility that could have been brought back. So we avoid those deadhead situations. Those deadhead situations, for those of you that don't know that term, it basically means that now we're not going to send someone over to one facility, bobtail them back without a trailer attached to them. We're always going to find for those automation, those processes that can, again, increase those efficiencies. And to your point again, save fuel cost. And again, it makes those operations much, much more greener as well too.
Well, that's the thing about this too, is I often feel like when I'm talking to companies about the benefits here, it's not, there's no trade-off when it comes to implementing a yard management system. It's not like you're sacrificing something to gain something else. You're literally improving, the water level is just rising at your organization. So your employees are happier, right? They're able to do their job more effectively. You've got a decrease in labor costs, right? Decrease in fuel costs. You've got improvement as far as CO2 emissions. There's no downside. And that's a part of this that it almost seems too good to be true. But the reality is that it's just become a blind spot for a lot of companies. It's an area where they're spending time and spending money. They don't even realize it. A big part of why we're doing this show and why we go to trade shows, why we do events, why we do speeches is because we are in the business of educating companies. Hey, this is not, it doesn't take a doctorate to figure out that by gaining better visibility and by implementing some simple automations in the yard, you can have improvements in all of these different areas. And that's true on the technology side. There's this sense in I think in the world, but I'll speak specifically to our industry, that technology is sort of like the linchpin that's just going to solve any problem, right? You throw enough, we talked about this on the last episode. If I just threw enough sensors at something, if I just threw enough robots at something, it's just going to fix it, right? I just spend enough money and it'll fix it. And as we all know, just because you spend money doesn't mean you're spending it wisely, right? So when it comes to this technology in the yard, there are some really interesting things happening. We've talked about RFID. We've talked about sensors in the yard and how we believe GPS is sort of the future there and really getting at, down to a spot awareness level of specificity. But those tablets, you can't overlook those. In our solution, we're already putting tablets in driver vehicles so that they can see and have a work queue of moves. Now we're using that GPS to automatically assign them the best move, right? And that's exactly what you're speaking to. But what about when you go a step further, Seve? And I'm going to ask the question because it's on everybody's minds, which is, how do we get rid of the drivers in the yard, right? How do we automate that to the next level? How do we get those driverless vehicles in the yard? I'm curious what your take is on this. Maybe we'll get one of Seve's hot takes here. But what about driverless vehicles? Where's that at right now?
That's a great question, Colin. And I've been approached, as you know, by a lot of those types of organizations that are using those EV vehicles out in the yard. Their challenge, though, is the fact that they don't understand operations. So when you bring up the term glad hands, they look at you blankly in the face and don't realize at the end of the day, you still need to have some way of putting on those brake lines onto that specific unit. Even if it's just one, you leave the emergency one off, that's okay, but you still have to get brakes on that unit. So those are the types of challenges those organizations are facing. In addition to, do we have a swing door situation where we need to back up a trailer and maybe leave it 5 feet away from the dock door so someone can open the trailer doors and then that trailer can be pushed all the way back to the dock. It's things like that and again, I'm not throwing cold water on the EV industry in the yard trucks because I really truly believe that is the future of the way we'll be going and doing operations in the next 5 to 10 years. But there's still some things that need to be figured out with respects to how operations work, how some of those manual processes that a manless yard truck cannot accomplish, and how will those tasks be completed. So, I've spoken to a lot of these organizations. I've provided them the ability to understand more about operations, to understand more about reefer units, for example, to understand that, hey, if a reefer unit comes into the yard that's not one of your owned assets, that may be sitting, for example, using Samsara or some other solution to monitor that unit, you've got to come up with some way of doing that. So those are just some of the gaps right now that are involved with using EV trucks in the yard. But again, at the end of the day, Colin, there's no doubt in my mind that that is where the industry is going to. We just have to figure out methods of completing those other manual tasks that typically were done in addition to driving the yard truck by that yard driver as well.
Well, I think that's a really good take, because the thing is that if you just look at an average yard, and you just go, if I were to build software for the average yard, what would it look like? What features would I include? That's not that hard to do, right? It's not that hard to come up with the devil is in the details, though. Every operation is different. Every operation has different requirements. They've got different dock door procedures. It might be a gatehouse. It might be a receiving office. They might have 2 yard drivers per shift. They might have 35 yard drivers per shift. And so what I've always believed is that the flexibility, to the extent that a yard management solution can be flexible enough to adapt to those operations, is to the extent they're going to be successful. And I think that's kind of what you're getting at here with the driverless vehicles, is really the devil's in the details. We can hook up to a trailer and move it. That's not the hard part, right? The hard part is all of the other nitty gritty stuff that comes into play when you start looking at it with under a microscope, or start going through with a fine tooth comb. And I do agree with you. I was on a call not long ago with somebody who was saying, well, over the road driverless vehicles are an inevitability. Someday we're just going to be sitting in a driverless car, sipping tea, having a beer while, we're going down the freeway. Okay, maybe that science fiction becomes reality. But I think the next step to maybe getting us towards, where I can watch Dune 2 on my car while I'm driving, is driverless vehicles in the yard. I mean, that's the obvious place to look. And I think you're right that, it's not a matter of if, it's when. If that's 5 years, if that's 10 years, if that's 15 years, it's hard to tell right now. I know our company has built our solution to integrate well with those types of solutions. We built it with that in mind, that, hey, when this becomes a reality, we're ready. We're not a hardware company, but there's some great ones out there that are putting a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of effort into figuring those solutions out. And I am excited to see where that goes. But it's not as simple as just, it's going to happen next year or something. There's more to do there. I agree with you.
Yep.
What do you think the future looks like for sustainability in the yard? I know we're coming in on a landing here. This is going to be a shorter episode than we've done in the past. But I think it's very punchy, because we've got some nice little things that we've covered during this. What does the future of sustainability look like? Do you think that there's more to do before we get to that driverless route, or is that really the next place that all of this needs to go, Seve?
I'm not sure there's anything else that, could be included in between. I'm sure we'll come up with something eventually, Colin, whether it be planned out or by accident, as you know already. But I think the EV trucks is going to be the next step. And I think at some point as well, too, there may be a combination of EV trucks and yard trucks out there, manned yard trucks, where the EV truck may be doing move to move from spot to spot, for example, in the yard, versus from spot to dock door. I think that may be the evolution of where we see some of this. And then, that may change the industry from a standpoint of what does that yard truck of the future look like? If I need to go pick up a trailer that's basically across the door from where it's parked at, do I really need a manned, rugged, regular yard truck like you see these days? Or can I go somewhere to something more lightweight that can do that process? I truly believe that EV truck is going to be the main focus moving forward, and that there's going to be some sort of happy medium between the two in order to be able to continue operations normally. Now, to that point, it will make them more efficient, more green, less fuel consumptions, etc. But I think there'll have to be some sort of happy medium between the two types of vehicles, for example.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Couldn't have said it better myself. Hey, here's the thing is if you're a company that is looking at what's the future of yard management, how can we get there? I'll tell you, the future is the next step right now, which is if you don't have a yard management system that works really well, that's already giving you those gains in efficiency and driver productivity, reducing your carbon footprint, the time is now to make that change, right? And we're excited. We're talking to some phenomenal companies that have identified, large corporations that are just now identifying, hey, yard management is a gap that we need to fulfill. And if we're going to be ready for the next step, if we're going to be ready for driverless vehicles, if we're going to be ready for automation in our facility, you know, not only inside the facility, but getting trailers to the inside of that facility, to those dock doors, we need to take this first step. And so I think a lot of companies that are coming to us now are excited to be taking that first step. We're certainly excited to work with them. If that's you, what I'd like you to do is check out our website, yardmanagementsolutions.com. You can schedule a live demo. Seve and I would love to talk with you. If you're a hardware vendor listening to this, if you're a company that is into creating driverless vehicles, or that's what you're investigating, or that's something that you just are really passionate about, that you know something about that we don't know, we'd love to have you on the show. Go ahead and send me a message on LinkedIn. Hit up Seve on LinkedIn. We're more than happy to make this a discussion. For now, I hope everybody has a great rest of their week. This has been a good discussion, and I look forward to the next one, Seve.
Me too, Colin. Thanks. Appreciate it.